So last week, one of the leading indicators of an oncoming recession reeled some of the markets. Now, if you're not familiar with, market speak or whatever stuff going on Wall Street, totally get you, totally understand. As I've said before on many occasions, things on Wall Street are usually a lot separate than, what's going on Main Street. However, there's one thing on Wall Street that can definitely affect Main Street, and that's when they cause a financial crisis, like a recession, which, again, one of those clear indicators of an incoming recession just happened. Now, it's called the yield curve inversion, right? And it's a strange name, but, again, a lot of these financial products and things that happen on Wall Street are fairly strange, right? So now this is a warning sign, apparently, that has predated every recession for the past 50 years. So it's really good at pointing towards, hey, we've got some troubled waters ahead, right? And so what happened, of course, it ended up causing a massive sell-off in the stock market, which lost the Dow about 800 points, right? Again, I know a lot of you people don't really care about, how many points rich people lost or corporations, whatever. Totally understand. But again, this is more important than that because it's at risk for the entire economy. So what happened is the yield, and this is what a yield curve inversion means, is that the 10-year, because the 10-year Treasury note, right? So this is bonds that people can buy in the United States government. There's a 10-year and there's a 2-year, right? So now the 10-year Treasury note broke below the rate for the 2-year Treasury note. And why is that important? Well, it means that investors would not get a better return for the 10-year bond over the 2-year bond. Now, again, that's important because investors expect a lower return when their money is tied up for a shorter period, right? So, okay, you get lower, because when you buy a bond, you get interest, right, for allowing the government to take your money and use it, because that's essentially what you're doing. And so after that 2 or 10-year period, the government, not only with interest, pays you back, and that's how you make money on bonds. So now these investors are expecting a lower return for a shorter bond. They require a higher yield to give them more return and a long-term investment. But now, at least for a short time, it flipped. So now it means that investors no longer have the confidence in your short-term fiscal health of the economy. That's bad because it is a sign of an incoming recession. So following this, right, and I hope you guys were with me on that one, because again, it can be a little bit confusing talking about, this Wall Street stuff and bonds and inversions, etc., right? But again, this is not a good sign, and combined with all the other stuff that we constantly talk about in the show all the time, all those things add up to a perfect storm, right? So now following this, President Trump talked to reporters on Sunday, and he said this, right? I don't see a recession. But wait, I don't see a recession. Well, okay, one hasn't happened yet, yes, but there are a lot of warning signs towards that are pointing towards a recession. So maybe you could take a look and be like, oh, you know what? I see there's some warning signs. Maybe we can go and fix this before it gets too late, before we actually have a recession. We can right the economy, right? That's not what Trump's saying. He says this. He says he doesn't see a recession because we're doing tremendously well. Our consumers are rich. I gave a tremendous tax cut, and they're loaded up with money. Our consumers are rich. Now, I wonder who he's referring to. I don't think he's referring to people making $30,000 a year, or people struggling to get into the middle class. I don't think those people really count. The average tax cut of somebody making around $20,000 a year, I think, or 25, was around $60. So I know you're loaded up with money. Look at all that. Mr. Moneybags over there making $25K, just got $60. That's enough to maybe go out to eat twice, depending on the restaurant. Wow. Okay. So, but no, consumers are rich. I gave a tremendous tax cut. 83% of that tax cut, by the way, went to the wealthiest American, right? So, $60 for poor people, right? People in the working class, and over $60,000 a year, mind you, for people who are in the top 1%. That's the difference between the tax cut, right? So, this is all while, and these are some of the factors, right, that are really leading to this recession, right? Um, you have half of all Americans that can't afford a $400 emergency. You have 70% of Americans who can't afford a $1,000 emergency. You have credit card debt that's over $1 trillion, student loan debt over $1.5 trillion. In total, you have consumer debt, which is at a combined $14 trillion. We have an economy that is financed by debt. Not good. And you know what? That number is above levels hit during the 2008 financial crisis. We are actually doing worse. Stagnating wages, and that's part of the reason, right? Slowing unemployment, or I'm sorry, slowing employment. Yes, there are companies that are actually starting to slow down and not hire as many people. Unemployment numbers are starting to go up again. You've got a ridiculous trade war with China. Again, perfect storm. Perfect storm. And yet the White House is in complete denial. Well, either that or they know exactly who they're talking about, and they're not talking about us. They're talking about, hey, man, the people in my social class, the fellow billionaires and millionaires, they're doing fantastic. Oh, we're doing great. Thank you for the tax cuts, Donald Trump. That's probably what's happening. But anyway, so now we're going to go to, again, the hilarious denials here. And this is White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro, as well as Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow. So now Kudlow goes on to meet the press, and he says this. He says, quote, well, I tell you what, I sure don't see a recession. No kidding, right? I think actually the second half, the economy is going to be very good in 2019. No, I don't see a recession. Now, look, if you guys don't know who Larry Kudlow is, right, or are not familiar with his work, he's had a very bad track record of making predictions. In fact, back in 2007, right before the recession hit, he said the same thing in articles penned in the National Review and other outlets, right? So now, let me give you a snippet from one of his articles that he wrote called Bush Boom Continues. It's as bad as it sounds, right? He says, quote, you can call it Goldilocks 2.0, but you can't call it a recession. That's Goldilocks. Oh, that sounds really nice, Goldilocks, right? But totally not a recession. In fact, he says, there's no recession coming. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not going to happen. At a bare minimum, we are looking at Goldilocks 2.0, and that's a minimum. Goldilocks is alive and well. Apparently, this is before Goldilocks was mauled by the three bears. He also said, the Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its sixth consecutive year with more to come. Yes, it's still the greatest story never told. Maybe that's because that story was complete and utter fiction. That's why nobody tells it. And then, of course, afterwards, that story basically turned into a nightmare. It turned into a horror story. Okay. Now, there's more terrible predictions. In a column in February 2008, Kudlow says, I'm going to bet that the economy will be rebounding sometime this summer, if not sooner. We're in a slow patch. That's all. It's nothing to get up in arms about. You can tell he's starting to get a little worried there. Like, no, slow patch, just slow patch. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. This is fine. Well, obviously, again, we all know what happened, right? We all lived through it. In fact, most of our generation, the millennial generation, kind of grew up through this entire thing. So, yeah. turned out to be real bad. But again, this is the same guy saying the same thing now that he said back then. I mean, it's kind of like that scene in The Naked Gun where there's all the stuff exploding in the background, and the guy's like, "Nothing to see here. Go home. Everything's fine." Or again, as I just mentioned, like the dog in that meme with the house is on fire. No, this is fine. What are you talking about? Recession? I don't see a recession. What recession? What warning signs? No, Bush boom. I mean, Trump boom. Great. Fantastic. This is why nobody should ever take Larry Kudlow seriously, or Peter Navarro, for that matter. He was wrong then. He's likely wrong now. He hasn't learned a damn thing. And basically what he is now is he is a cheerleader for Donald Trump and a cheerleader for the top 1%. Because you know who are the only people that made it through the 2008 recession even better than they were before? The wealthy Americans, the top 1%. So maybe, I guess, in their world, everything is fine. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.